This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the best all-in-one platform for any of your website building needs. Hey guys, it's Celestia, and today we're going to talk about art fixing. It's something that has honestly been talked to death at this point, probably in large part because despite the fact that it's so widely hated, it's still constantly happening, and with more frequency, aggression, and relentlessness than ever. But it's because the issue has been talked to death that I've never made a video about it before. There are a million others out there, and I didn't feel like I had anything to say about it that they hadn't already said. And I also thought that because everyone was talking about it, the trend of art fixing would eventually die down as more awareness and attention was brought to why it was bad. I thought that the more people knew about it, the less people would do it. Thought. Past tense, because then I deep dived into TikTok to analyze the art community there for a recent video linked in the iCard above, and realized that this isn't a problem that's getting better with time like I had expected it to. It's getting even worse and more normalized than before, which was astounding to me. Like, people have long since established that fixing art is bad, and there's no shortage of people talking about why. And yet, rather than dying down, it's become more prolific and popular than it's ever been. So while I will quickly go over what art fixing is and why it's bad, the reason I'm making this video is not to be the millionth person to say fixing art is bad, but rather to examine why it's still happening so often, why people still feel justified doing it, and whether or not any of their reasons for feeling that way are actually valid and justifiable. Is fixing someone else's art ever okay? Today we're gonna go over the most prominent and common reasons that people think so, and try to objectively analyze whether or not they're right. But before we do, let me take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Squarespace. I've said in many videos before that the most important thing for a professional artist to have is a portfolio that's clean, organized, and appealing to look at. And it's true. It's what makes a client decide whether or not they want to work with you. And the easiest way to make sure your portfolio website is professional and accessible is to build it with Squarespace, a website building and hosting tool that I've personally been using to run my art studio for several months now, long before they actually reached out to me. Their gallery features are so versatile that you can organize your art exactly how you want it, and their automatic image scaling means that the dimensions of what you upload doesn't matter. It'll display it perfectly right away, which is a godsend when it comes to saving you time during portfolio building. And even better, Squarespace has e-commerce integration, so if you wanted, you could make an all-in-one portfolio and store website, with not just your art displayed for clients to see, but the stuff you're selling it on being sold right there too. No matter what your needs are, their tools and templates will make bringing your vision to life easy and straightforward, which means one less barrier between you and sharing your art with the world. Anyway, thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring this video, and please go check out squarespace.com to get a free trial to build your own website, because no matter what your site needs are, they have a template for you. And once you've built it, go to squarespace.com/touchofcelestia to save 10% on your first website or domain purchase. Now, all that aside, let's get into the video. At this point, I'm sure most of you already know what art fixing is and why it's widely regarded as pretty much the worst in every way, but I'm sure there are also still a handful of you that don't. So I'm quickly gonna explain the basics of the trend and the backlash that it rightfully faces. Art fixing is the practice of taking a piece of someone else's art and redrawing some aspect of it with the intention of correcting a mistake or problem that was present in the original piece, according to the one correcting it anyway, and then usually posting it publicly on social media. The mistake or problem that the art fixer is correcting could be a wide range of things, but the most frequent examples are either technical issues or social justice issues. As far as technical issues go, you'll most often see people fixing either anatomical errors or stylistic choices that the original artist made that the fixer found ugly or unappealing. In terms of social justice issues, there are a lot of possible motivations for an art fixer. The original piece lightened the character's canon skin tone, otherwise known as whitewashing. The original piece depicted a character as thinner or more societally attractive than they are in canon. Or the original piece depicted a character with traits that the fixer deems unacceptable. And unacceptable can mean a few things. One, that they looked at the art and thought it was wrong and in need of fixing because it doesn't provide adequate representation. Usually that they drew the character white and thin, and the fixer believed that the character should be of a different race or have a different body type. Or reason number two, they looked at art of a non-white character and based on some disgusting ass racist beliefs decided that they needed to be fixed and made white. As you can see, there are a variety of different reasons based on those examples alone that might motivate someone to quote unquote fix someone's art, ranging from genuinely well-intentioned critique to racist harassment and bullying. We've seen all of them time and time again within the art community, from ZEEFIXESART to the croquet intricate style correction, to the Genshin Impact Sumeru character designs, to the HBO Scooby-Doo fan art debacle, and that's only the tip of the iceberg. But the bottom line that most people realize and understand is that no matter what the reasons are for fixing art, the end result isn't productive. Best case scenario, the fixer is genuinely trying to help the artist whose work they're fixing, but the way that they've gone about trying to help has actually hurt the artist in question by effectively publicly shaming them instead. Worst case scenario, the art fixing was a deliberately malicious attempt to either bully an artist whose work they don't like or target and attack a minority that they don't want to see represented in art. So either way, the practice is either at best misguided and hurtful, and at worst, hateful and vitriolic. And if the best case scenario is bad, there is no justification for continuing to do the thing. And yet it continues. We're still seeing it over and over again with no signs of stopping. ZEEFIXESART was recently discovered to have been continuing their art fixing crusade on Facebook until late last year. And the Scooby-Doo incident happened even more recently, despite art fixing being something that's been publicly denounced for ages now. For context, the Scooby-Doo situation is essentially that recently HBO announced a new show that reimagines the Scooby-Doo gang, and several of the characters in that gang are no longer white. This sparked its own share of controversy, but the relevant point to this is that the HBO show depicts Shaggy, Velma, and Daphne as people of color. An artist who, seeing the resurgence of Scooby-Doo popularity, decided to draw fan art based on the original series, and depicted the whole cast as white, and they explicitly stated that it had nothing to do with the new HBO show and was only based on the original franchise. Another artist then decided to correct this fan art by changing the races of Shaggy, Velma, and Daphne to reflect the new HBO version's designs, as you can see here. For a more detailed look into the situation, I'll link Mohammed Agbadi's video in the iCard above and the description, but the point is that the art fixer saw some completely harmless fan art that was deliberately and clearly not intended to reflect the HBO show's redesigns, and decided to say, I need to make this right. I'll draw over their work and publicly shame them. It's my only choice. And this happened recently, after art fixing has been widely and almost universally criticized for years. It's only one of many examples of it too, so why? Why are people still so relentlessly committing to this trend of correcting the work of other artists, even after it's been made abundantly clear that it's more harmful than it is helpful? Is it because they genuinely think they're doing the right thing? Because they're pandering to what they think left-wing audiences want to see? Because they're being deliberately malicious? Or because they're just trolling and trying to start drama where drama does not need to be? And just as pressingly, are they ever right? Is there ever a good, justifiable, valid reason to fix someone else's art? Well, I think it depends entirely on their reasons for doing so. So we're gonna examine all of those primary reasons individually to look for some answers. Let's start with the most obvious and easy example because it's the fastest, and more importantly, I want my stance on it to be clear right off the bat. If a person's reason for quote-unquote fixing someone's art is to erase a feature of the character that they don't like because of their own bias and hate, they're an asshole. Simple as that. You see a character drawn as fat and you fix them to be thin? Asshole. You see a character drawn with scars, arm and leg hair, or other societally unattractive traits and decide to redraw that art to get rid of them? Asshole. You see a character drawn as a non-white race and decide to fix that art by making them white? The biggest asshole. These people are driven by hate, and the only reason they're doing what they're doing is to attack the groups they look down on. There is no justification for what they do, and whether they're trolls that are only interested in generating discourse or just genuinely irredeemably hateful, it makes no difference. Either way, their art fixes should be ignored and disregarded as the unproductive, disgusting demonstrations of cruelty that they are, or even reported if they're spreading hate and subsequently violating the rules of the platform that they're posted on. But what about the opposite reason? What if someone is fixing art to provide representation for minorities rather than erase it out of hate? This is where it starts getting complicated, because both their motivation for doing it and whether or not they have any right to is heavily dependent on the situation. For example, ZEEFIXESART, if you're somehow unfamiliar with their whole shit show in the year 2022, was an artist that aggressively and relentlessly took the character designs of popular media and fixed them by making them darker skinned, overweight, and hairy. This wasn't done with the intention of race bending a character for fan art or even redesigning them for representation's sake. It was done with the explicitly stated purpose of fixing the original design because they thought it was wrong. In fairness, it's widely believed that Z was actually just a troll trying to stir up drama within the art community, a theory that Thuman explores more in the video linked in the iCard above, but for the sake of this examination, we're gonna assume they were serious. I don't think they were, to be honest, but that's not the point, because it still stands as an example of how the reverse of whitewashing in terms of art fixing can be harmful too, or at least unproductive. Because in this case, the only reason that I can see that person having for doing it, if they're not legitimately seeking representation, would be to be hateful. And it should go without saying that that means there's really no good reason or justification for it to be done. But like I said, it gets more more complicated when we consider other potential situations, like if what the art fixer is trying to accomplish is legitimately to just get more representation for visual minorities in media. For example, the recent Genshin Impact controversy. Genshin Impact is a game with a very, very extensive cast of characters, and most of them are either white or very pale. So when they announced that they were adding a nation in the game that's based on the Middle East and some parts of South Asia, a lot of the fandom assumed that that meant more darker skinned characters would be added, which was something people were very rightfully looking forward to. That didn't happen. Instead, they released a bunch more light-skinned characters, and as a result, they were met with a lot of backlash. I'll link a video in the iCard above that goes over the whole issue in more detail, but my point in bringing it up is that the backlash prompted some artists to fix the character designs that Genshin released by making them darker skinned, and that's a prime example of the more complex side of art fixing that I'm referring to here. Because on a very basic level, I can understand what motivated them to do that. Whether they handled it right or not, they saw a lack of diverse representation in a thing they liked, and their primary goal was to just get that representation one way or the other. To really play devil's advocate, they may even have thought that fixing those designs could be legitimately productive, that if their fixes got enough traction and attention on social media, Hoyoverse would actually change the designs to reflect that feedback, or would at least consider it more going forward for their future characters. It's much harder to thoroughly denounce art fixers with that mentality, because it's entirely possible that their reasons are completely well-intentioned, and they might even believe that what they're doing could spark positive change. So does that make it okay? Is this an instance where art fixing is actually justifiable? In my opinion, no. I'm sympathetic towards these art fixers and understanding of their motivations, but I personally believe that regardless of their intentions, fixing the art or character designs of popular media to force representation where there is none doesn't actually help provide positive representation at all, and really only has a negative impact even if that's not what they intend. To be clear, I'm not saying I think race bending a character isn't okay. At least in my opinion, drawing an existing character as a different race is harmless and fun even, and probably can help minorities feel more represented in media if they see or create fan art of characters looking like them. Like, look at Blacktober. It's a whole month devoted to art of black characters, and a lot of that means reimagining existing characters as black in the process. It's a really cool celebration of black people and characters, and although it faces its own share of backlash, I think it's a great example of race bending being used as a positive, uplifting practice within the art community. For more nuance and detail into Blacktober specifically, I'll send you to Fiona Paulo's video in the iCard above, because she did an amazing job examining and explaining all sides of the controversy surrounding it. But I'm bringing it up now because I want to make it abundantly clear that I'm not saying race bending in art, as fan art of existing media and characters, is bad or not okay. What I'm very specifically referring to is not when an artist draws their interpretation of an existing character as another race, but rather when an artist redraws or edits another artist's work of that character to fix them to be another race for the sake of representation. Because even if their intention is purely positive, they're still defacing another artist's work without their permission. And what is it really accomplishing beyond that? Making a point? Trying to hurt or shame the original artist? Convincing the original artist to change that character's design themselves? Going back to the Genshin example, it would have been entirely possible to just verbally protest the lack of racial diversity in the game if the goal was to get Hoyoverse to make changes, and that would have been completely fair and reasonable. But fixing their character designs isn't going to persuade them any more than a verbal protest would, nor would the fixed version suddenly become official or offer some kind of real positive representation in and of itself. It only serves to make people angry and disrespect the original artist, who probably had little to no say in what the character looked like anyway. If representation is lacking, forcing it by fixing existing characters to be more diverse isn't actually going to result in more representation, because it's not going to make that change canon or convince the original creators of the character to change them. And trying to convince them to do so in such an aggressive, disrespectful manner might actually do more harm than good, rather than trying to constructively explain to them why including more racially diverse characters is so important. It's also something that brings up another important factor to consider: the difference between fixing the art of a huge team or company and fixing the art of an individual artist. A lot of people feel that if the art fixer is fixing the art of a company, it's much less harmful, but if they're fixing the art of an individual artist, it's unacceptable. And to an extent, I can understand this. The company and its art team probably won't be directly hurt by an art fix that you post on Twitter of their character design, and there's also no individual artist being attacked by it. The whole team is being criticized by way of the fix existing, not just one person. They also arguably have more obligation to actually provide representation throughout their content than an individual creator would, based on their ability to reach much, much wider audiences and potentially make real change in the way that minorities are represented in media, which reasonably opens them up to more scrutiny when they failed to do so. And I can understand art fixers feeling, as a result, that fixing the art of these companies is harmless. But number one, you never know if if the actual artist that did work on the piece being fixed as part of that company is seeing this and being hurt by it, because it's entirely possible that they are. And number two, even if fixing the art of a company rather than an individual is completely harmless, does that mean it's helpful? Again, to me, that's what it all comes down to. Art fixing doesn't create positive representation or convince companies to make more diverse characters, at least not any more so than a more constructive, less disrespectful method would. So even if it's harmless, it's not helpful either. So what is it accomplishing beyond normalizing a harmful trend? I think it's also important to mention on that note in particular that there's a very big difference between making a fan redesign of a character and fixing the original design. I don't think there's anything wrong at all with redesigning your own alternate version of an existing character and sharing that design, so long as it's done respectfully. It can be a really cool practice that will help you develop your character design skills and even show appreciation of the original character and piece of media. And that is not something that I mean to criticize in the slightest, although that is somewhere where I think that the distinction between company and individual is important again, because redesigning a character from popular media is very different from redesigning an artist's OC without their permission, which is a lot more questionable. Anyway, my point is that redesigning a character is entirely different than taking the art done for their original design and altering it, claiming that altered version to be fixed. The implication of there being something wrong with the original design is what makes that so toxic and harmful rather than transformative and fun, which is something I'll go into more detail about later on. Finally, what about in cases where the character's canon design isn't being fixed, but rather someone's fan art of that character? It's not the original artist's failure to provide adequate representation that motivates this art fixing. It's the fan artist's failure to depict the character as they are in canon. For example, if an artist clearly and deliberately whitewashes a canonically POC character in their work, would it then be justifiable to fix their fan art of that character by altering the skin tone to be accurate? Well, I think this is hands down the most understandable reason. It still brings me back to the same question. Does fixing that art make positive change? If you think the artist is open-minded enough to change, would it not be more productive to just tell them why whitewashing is wrong rather than publicly shaming them so that they can understand their mistake and learn to not make it again? And if you think the artist is just irredeemably intentionally racist and not willing to change, is bringing more attention to their work by fixing it just to attack them actually helping if you know that it won't make them stop whitewashing? Personally, I think there are more constructive solutions in either scenario than fixing the artist's work, and therefore I personally believe that this still isn't okay even in this instance, despite the fact that I understand and sympathize with the hypothetical art fixer's motivation. So in terms of all of these morality-based reasons for fixing art, are any of them valid and justifiable? Well, honestly, yeah, I think some of them are, but them being valid as reasons, as the things that motivate the art fixers to do what they do, still doesn't make the act of fixing someone's art valid. I think a lot of these reasons are fundamentally well-intentioned, but I can't think of one instance where the issue that they're trying to address with the art fixing couldn't be more constructively addressed by less malicious means. And if it can be addressed by hurting the artist less, then I personally believe that it should be. That's just the social justice side of things though. We're a million years into this video and we still haven't looked at the technical side of art fixing, so let's do that now. By technical, I mean art fixers that aren't taking issue with the actual content of the artist's work, but the work itself. They don't care that you drew sexy Sonic the Hedgehog, they care that you drew his nose too big, and they're gonna draw over your work to correct it. And just like before, there are a wide variety of reasons that an art fixer might think it acceptable or even pertinent to do this. And just like before, they're pretty evenly divided between well-intentioned but misguided and deliberately malicious and hateful. So let's start with the deliberately malicious and hateful side because it's faster and much more straightforward. In my recent video discussing the art community on TikTok, I explained that for a multitude of reasons, the bullying and harassment of young beginner artists for drawing badly has become increasingly commonplace there. And it's for that reason that malicious art fixing is so prevalent in that community. It's a good example of art being fixed, not to help the artist grow, but to mock them for not being good enough in the first place. And there are ultimately no valid or acceptable reasons to do that. I'm not sure why TikTok in particular is home to quite so much more art fixing than any other platform I've seen, but I suspect that it has something to do with the huge focus on thoughtlessly following trends, and the fact that because it's short-form video content, it's really easy to actually show the process of fixing the art and drag out the mocking process as a result. Regardless, the reasons these art fixers have for doing what they're doing are usually pretty simple. They think it's funny and either don't know or don't care how harmful it is, they think it'll get them followers, or they're so insecure about their own art that they'd rather make themselves feel better by tearing down someone else's. Sometimes it's a combination of all three, but none of them are even vaguely constructive or well-intentioned, so they're pretty easily written off as assholes that need to grow up and stop weaponizing the trend of art fixing to insult and bully other artists in the community. And unfortunately, the vast majority of art fixers do fall into this category of asshole. But there are are cases where the art fixer genuinely does want to help the artist whose work they're fixing, and that's where this gets complicated, because it can help that artist. Redlining, for example, is when an artist draws over mistakes in another artist's piece with the correct way to draw the things that they drew wrong, and it's an incredibly useful practice that many artists utilize in their studies and benefit heavily from. Having someone fix your art in a way that shows you your mistakes and how to correct them is exceptionally valuable, which is why channels like Sam Does Arts and Ethan Becker are so successful, because they fix their viewers' submitted art in a way that shows them how to improve, and it works. The difference is that their viewers do submit that art and volunteer to have their art fixed, whereas the vast majority of artists who have their work fixed online do not. They just have someone draw over their work and post it publicly without their consent, which not only effectively shames them, but doesn't even constructively explain why the fixes were necessary in the first place, which they need to know in order to grow and fix them. It comes down to the wider issue of unsolicited critique, a topic that I've touched on multiple times before on this channel, and am planning a specific dedicated video on, because it's complicated. As I've said before, to summarize, in my opinion, even the most well-intentioned unsolicited critique is still something you should avoid, because best case scenario, the artist does learn something valuable from it and it improves their art, but it does so at the expense of their self-esteem, because them not looking for critique and receiving it anyway probably made them feel pretty shitty. And worst case scenario, the artist wasn't looking to improve in the first place or was too insecure and sensitive to be able to handle critique, and you offering it anyway just made them feel terrible or even stopped them from drawing altogether. As far as I'm concerned, it's always best to ask an artist if they're open to critique if you're adamant about giving it, and respect their answer if they say no. And the same goes for art fixing. Even the most well-intentioned art fixing that is exclusively done with the intention of helping the original artist is still running the risk of hurting them deeply in the process. And even if it does teach them how to improve something about their art, it's nothing they couldn't have learned by you approaching them privately and teaching them directly, rather than posting publicly and inadvertently shaming them in front of others. Just like every other instance of art fixing we've talked about today, the end result that the art fixer is seeking could be achieved in a way that hurts the original artist less. So if the intent really is to help them, use the other way. Art fixing without consent is never the best, most constructive way to help another artist, and it usually does more harm than good. I'd also like to mention here that there's a very thin line between correcting an artist's mistake and erasing their deliberate stylistic choice. It's a thin line because it's a nuanced topic in and of itself. When is it an art style and when is it technically incorrect? When does art style become an excuse for drawing something wrong because you don't know how to draw it right? It's something I'm going to discuss more in its own video, but in this context, I want to talk about the ways it's deeply embedded in art fixing, because the line between a stylistic choice and an actual mistake is so thin, art fixers frequently fail to walk it right. The so-called corrections they make on the artist's work are often just changing their style to be more realistic, when the original piece was never made to be realistic in the first place, and subsequently doesn't benefit at all from the revisions. In this case, most art fixers tend to fall into the first category of just an asshole, because they find the artist's style ugly or unappealing and decide to fix it to what is usually semi-realism. But there are some instances of the fixer actually wanting to help and not realizing that they mistook a stylistic choice for a technical mistake. This is especially true given that a lot of the artists that are out here fixing art aren't actually that technically skilled themselves. Regardless, either way, defaulting to fixing it as a response is not the way to go. So all of that said, those are the most common reasons I've found that art fixers use to justify their actions. And after analyzing them more closely, I think I can understand better why this trend isn't going away. There isn't just one reason that a person might think it's okay to do, and honestly, a lot of the more nuanced reasons actually seem very fair and understandable to me. And in terms of denouncing art fixing, not stopping it, I mean, the well-intentioned people don't think they're doing anything wrong, so they won't look at the people calling it out as calling them out. And the people with bad intentions don't care if it's called out because they don't care that it's wrong. It also doesn't help that in communities like TikTok's, art fixing is basically a normalized, acceptable practice that a lot of people don't even bat an eye at. And there are most definitely communities on Twitter and other social media that share that mentality too. Even on YouTube, as I mentioned, channels like Ethan Becker, Sam Does Arts, and Colleen are all popularizing art fixing as a helpful and entertaining thing. And I'm not blaming them for that. Their viewers submit their art and consent to having it publicly fixed, and these creators aren't in the wrong for doing just that. But I do think that they're inadvertently popularizing art fixing as a normal thing to an audience that might be too young or uneducated to understand that it's only a normal, helpful thing when the artist whose work is being fixed asked for it to be. It's not their fault, but I do think it's having an impact, especially amongst younger demographics. Ultimately though, while looking into these reasons and situations has made me more understanding of art fixers, I still don't personally think there is any instance in which fixing someone's art is acceptable. And that's largely because I can't think of a single instance in which the art fixer's goal couldn't be achieved in a better better way. If they're trying to get more representation in media, there are alternative ways to go about getting it that are more constructive and might actually affect positive change. If they're trying to help the artist fix technical mistakes in their work, they could help that artist more and without the risk of hurting them by reaching out to them privately and offering a direct critique if they're open to it. If they're trying to fight whitewashing or fat phobia or something similar in the artist's inaccurate depiction of a canon character, they could explain to the artist why their art was damaging and how to avoid making that mistake again. If they're trying to bully or harass an artist or attack a minority group, they could try being less of a fucking asshole. There are literally better alternatives to every reason you could possibly have to fix someone's art, and I don't think there's any excuse to choose art fixing instead. Honestly, to me, a lot of it also comes down to the word fixing. To claim that you fixed someone else's art is to claim empirically that there was something wrong with their art in the first place. And there's something so deeply pretentious and arrogant about asserting that you have the authority and ultimate skill required to make that judgment. And in so many cases, the problem lies exclusively with that word being used. If it weren't for the implication of something being wrong with the original art or character, a lot of the situations I brought up today would have been fine. Redesigning an existing character without claiming to have fixed the original, totally fine. Drawing fan art of a canonically non-black character as black without claiming to have fixed the original design of that character, so totally fine that there's a whole month dedicated to it. The mentality isn't toxic because of what they're changing. It's toxic because they're claiming it needed to be changed. I don't know. I guess I just think we need to be less concerned with what other artists are doing and more concerned with what we're doing. Like, in the time it took for this artist to fix the art of Genshin's Candace to be black, they could have drawn fan art of her as black, hurt no one, made something they love, and shared their version of representation that they wanted to see. In the time it took someone to fix another artist's work without their permission and post it online, they could have started offering actual paid art critiques to artists who wanted their input and would have found it helpful. So much effort is going into fixing art when there are a million better ways to go about whatever they're trying to achieve, and it's just disheartening, especially when they're actually well-intentioned, which I do think some of them are. I also think most of them are just assholes using the trend to spread hate and mock other artists, and in most cases, I see no reason to acknowledge them at all beyond denouncing what they're doing, blocking them, and moving on. Anyway, that's all for this video. What do you guys think? Is fixing someone else's art ever okay, assuming they haven't consented to it? Are there situations I didn't mention today that might put it in a different light? Why do you think it's still happening so often, despite the fact that it's being so regularly criticized and denounced? Let me know in the comments, because I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, given how persistent and controversial of a problem it is. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. Special thank you as always to channel members Cafe Soleil, Joseph Solomon, Unknown Code, Lucian Azapa, and Abyss Reborn, as well as patrons Batman, Kyle Lowe, Blue Swanson, This Is Totally My Name, Unity, Cora Fear, Jamisha Walker, Shirome Artiste, Elengshi, Soul Crystal, Kim Yen, and Stony Cobra 13 for their support, and I'll see you in the next one.